presentation. Oh, the first presentation that was important. Thank you for that, Emmanuel. Okay, so the first presentation is from Data Science Without Borders. Miranda Barraza will be presenting. She is the project manager for the Data Science Without Borders project, part of the African Population and Health and Research Center. Um, she has a Master in Public Health and Health Promotion from Brunel University in London, and she also has a certificate in project management from the University of Washington. So we'll start with Miranda. Thank you. Emmanuel, do you have her video?
Could you please repeat? I thought we were going to have Francis. That
Oh,
is not
Francis is not
required.
able. Yeah, he will not be joining.
Okay. Let me.
1 minute. Thank you.
Okay, we seem to be experiencing some technical issues. They're saying the video exceeds the maximum resolution. Let me try to do it a different way.
Okay. Try to see if I can.
Natalia, I can do
Yes.
the presentation live if necessary.
Okay, thank you. Do you have your slides too?
Yeah, I have them ready.
Oh, there you are.
There.
Okay. Let's listen. Thank you. Go ahead, Emmanuel. We cannot hear it, or I cannot.
Could you confirm whether everything is okay now?
I cannot hear her. Does everybody else does? Maybe it's just me,
No,
but
we don't hear.
okay.
Okay,
Just
then
the
maybe she could present from her end.
okay. Okay. Thank you, Miranda. We'll take you on your offer.
Please confirm that you can see my screen.
We do. We don't see it on press. Oh, there you go. Perfect. Go ahead.
Thanks. Thank you very much for the opportunity. That always happens with technology, so it's understandable. My name is Miranda Barraza. I am the project manager for the Data Science Without Borders project. And today we'll just be talking to you about, it's an initiative really around strengthening data science capability in African health institutions. So when you think about strengthening data science capability, you ask yourself, why does this matter? As we know, African institutions are generating more data than ever, but capacity gaps continue to persist. And data has to be usable, ethical, and equitable for you to achieve the impact that you'd want to achieve. So Data Science Without Borders really focuses on building federated, fair-aligned AI-ready systems through locally owned strategies, and I'll talk more about it in the next few slides. But today we'll really focus on two pillars, that's the capability maturity assessments and co-design capacity building. So what is Data Science Without Borders? It's really a collaborative initiative that is it's designed to strengthen data systems in African health institutions. Currently, we are focused on 3 institutions across 3 countries. So we have the Institute for Health Research, Epidemiology and Surveillance Training, in short, IRISEF in Senegal. We have the Douala General Hospital in Cameroon, and then we have the Amoa Hansen Research Institute in Ethiopia. The project itself is coordinated and led by the African Population and Health Research Center in Nairobi. In addition to the three institutions are what we call Pathfinder institutions. So that's where the project activities majorly are carried out. Whatever solutions we come up with, capacity building is carried out in this. And to help this happen, we have technical partners that support. We have the Makerere AI Lab, who I think now are called Makerere Center for Artificial Intelligence and Data Science. They are supporting in areas around ethical AI and natural language processing. We have the London School for Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. They are supporting aspects around capacity building for the technical aspects. We have OSPO now that are supporting with open science aspects. And then we have CODATA that are also supporting around platforms, data harmonization, cataloging, and so on. So really the project itself, we are currently in our second year. It is funded by Wellcome, and it has three main objectives. The first one is around what I've just said, strengthening data systems, capacity building, and then the second objective is around collaboration and co-creation for data science innovations. And the third objective is around building a federated no-code platform for that would allow analysis for non-data scientists, non-statisticians. You can do your analysis without necessarily having to code. So we really are focusing on improving data utilization, AI, machine learning in healthcare, and of course, strengthening institutional capacity. So it's a huge consortium that's really anchored in multi-country partnerships. So the project itself is led by our four principal investigators. From APHRC, we have Dr. Agnes Chiraga, who's the project lead and overall principal investigator. She's also on this call. From Ethiopia, we have Dr. Alemseged Abdissa. From Cameroon, we have Prof. Sambachu. And from Senegal, we have Dr. Moussa Sa. So our first year really was around trying to understand what the data ecosystem is in the Pathfinders. Because before you talk about building capacity and strengthening systems, you have to understand what's on the ground. So we carried out an exercise, an assessment to figure out what the data ecosystem is. And really wanted to identify what regulatory gaps are existing, which areas need harmonized data governance. In terms of investment, where can we invest in sustainable and scalable data infrastructure? Looking at data access and use, how do we enable that through collaboration? And then identifying opportunities where now data-driven AI analytics and digital solutions can be leveraged. And to do this, we used a tool from the Higher Education and Statistics Agency. We adapted it to our context from the UK to assess the data maturity. So the tool itself looks at 4 domains. That's around people, processes, technology, activities, really, and partnerships. So for people, it's looking at what skills exist, the leadership style, data culture. And then for processes, issues around governance, data workflows, ethics, and ethics. Then for platforms, of course, it's around infrastructure, the tools, interoperability, and so on. And then, of course, partnerships is around external collaboration. So this tool, we first deployed it to our 3 Pathfinder institutions, and then we asked them to identify some partners within their countries to deploy the tool. It was a questionnaire. We put it in REDCap. It was multilingual. And then at the end of it, we had about 20 institutions that responded to the survey in the 3 countries. So following analysis, usually for maturity assessment, it gives you a score. And depending on the score, then you are rated as from chaotic to predictive. So chaotic really is the Lowest level, meaning that there are no standards, no strategy, you're really manual. And then to predictive being now you have advanced through different levels and is quite strong. So for our 3 pathfinders, we found Douala General Hospital, which is a public hospital, was at the reactive stage, meaning that they are just in need of a bit of infrastructure and digitization to move up to, but they have a good foundation for data science. Then IRISEF was stable. They have some processes in place. They understand their data. And then, of course, ARI really had very good systems in place. And of course, they are like a fertile ground for us. If you're deploying like the no-code platform, they're in a good place to do that. And then, of course, PHRC was at the predictive level. So we also looked at it from a country perspective, and similar to what we saw with our pathfinders, we found that across the 4 domains, Ethiopia was really more at the proactive stage. Senegal was more stable, and then Cameroon was more also stable, but now at a lower level than Senegal. So this was really leading to co-designing. And I think one of the aspects, like I've said, one of the aspects we are looking at is capacity building. And when you're thinking about co-designing, we are asking why do we need to co-design? As you've seen, we are a consortium. We are different organizations, different countries. But so really co-designing is about working together to align your support with the real needs of the institution. So we want to be more responsive rather than directive in terms of the capacity building efforts that we have in order to build institutional ownership and enable sustainability. So how we co-design is we have several working groups within the consortium. We have one around open science. We have one specifically for students. We have a cohort of students. We have one for we have several for the technical aspects, some looking at platforms, some looking at documentation and cataloging, some looking at harmonization. And then we've also mapped our training needs based on what we got in the maturity assessment, because we had a whole section around training needs so that you can build strategies around now different areas. So like ethics and governance, fair and metadata, AI, data literacy, visualization, and so on. And we've also laid the foundation for federated analysis, because that's one of the areas that we are moving towards, given the challenges around data sharing. So some of the outcomes so far, we've done some bootcamps and hackathons on explainable and ethical AI, data harmonization and linkage. We are currently developing a no-code platform. I think the beta version is being finalized, and we hope to deploy to our pathfinders in the next 2 months or so. We have several students that we are supporting. That's both in research and mentorship. And these are across the 3 pathfinders and one of the other technical partners. And then, of course, forming institutional frameworks for training. So what we've learned so far is capability is multifaceted. It really requires tailored growth in the different domains. Institutional readiness really varies. And for you to achieve equity, you really need to look at tailored context-specific support, which is what we are focusing on now as a project. Then the importance of co-design in building ownership and ensuring relevance and sustainability. And of course, the importance of mentorship and applied innovation in accelerating real-world impact. So really, currently what we are looking for are collaborators in helping us to co-develop advanced training on AI, ML, and governance, data governance, partners to contribute to infrastructure development and just help us think through sustainability, especially around the building of the capacity for data science, but also the use of data science tools. And then, of course, supporting talent development through mentorship. We have a cohort of fellows. One of our hopes is to build a cohort of African data scientists. That's why we have the PhD and the MSc students in the project, and they are in need of some mentors. So that's one of the areas we are looking for collaborators. But really our call to action is let's partner to build equitable Africa-led data ecosystems. So these are our partners, and thank you for your time. In case you have any questions, you can always contact myself or Dr. Agnes Chiraga, who's also on the call. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miranda. Thank you so much. As we said at the beginning, there will be a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions for Miranda, please save them or write them in the chat and we'll get back to them. Our next speaker is David Chen. He's the co-CEO and co-founder of Kapsule, which is an innovative healthcare data analytics company dedicated to becoming Africa's go-to healthcare data platform.
I think the same thing is happening. The resolution of the video is incompatible with the Zoom platform. So we might have to have the same arrangement.
Okay, would you like me to present?
Yes, please.
Okay. Can you let me know once you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
We do.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Hello, I'm David Chen, one of the co-founders of Kapsule, and the next few minutes I'll show you how we're turning healthcare data into something valuable and gaining insights in a way that is secure and also commercially viable and sustainable. And I'll also show you how we've managed to do this in a way that is both compliant with regulations and scalable. I'll also share some of the practical tips and tricks that we developed at Kapsule to turn your healthcare data into valuable and refined insights. To begin, I'm sure that everyone here has heard the mantra, data is a new oil. I love that analogy for many reasons, mostly because crude oil is relatively worthless when you compare it to the value of all of the refined products, such as petrol, jet fuel, and asphalt. So just like how with oil, you need to refine it into those useful substances, it is very unhelpful in its raw format. Health data is very similar and needs to be refined in a very similar way to realize its true value. You don't need to look any further than Meta to understand just how powerful data could be. Today, Meta has over $1.3 trillion in value, and it's growing, and the entire business was built off data. In their case, it was refined behavioral data, not simply raw server logs. Healthcare data has the potential to be even more valuable because it's richer, and how much more valuable can that be? The reason for this is that every row of health data can not only save a life, but could also incrementally add value to a country's GDP. So what makes healthcare data most valuable? Well, there are three components. The first is economic. Health data can help drive the sales and marketing of medicinal products across the world by making sure the right products find the right patients and the right customers. Globally, today that is worth over $1.4 trillion. Interestingly, Africa is growing at about 18% annually. Secondly, is societally. It can help local government and health ministries create disease burden models and create early warning systems that can help researchers to develop their best-in-class medicine through extensive R&D. This R&D market is worth $300 billion in 2024. And finally, you have the ethical considerations in philanthropy and donors looking to drive in long-term impact through a better allocation of scarce resources and better utilization of capital. So with the healthcare space and with the donor space, it was collectively worth almost $500 billion, which collectively takes the total value of healthcare data to just under $2.4 trillion in 2024. And it has double-digit growth potential for the coming years. So back to the analogy of oil refinery, Kapsule is creating the refinery for healthcare data by ingesting terabytes of healthcare data from a mixture of hospitals, insurers, pharmacies, and health tech across 9 African countries and over 10,000 healthcare facilities to give visibility to over 51 million patients and also to assess the health needs across these countries. In this next step, I'll actually talk you through the refinery process and how we got to this stage at Kapsule. So firstly, before you do anything or write a single line of code, you need to make sure that what you're about to do is compliant and falls in line with the 2 major pillars of compliance, both data protection and data sovereignty. The data protection component is essentially to keep people's information unidentifiable and safe, and data sovereignty is to keep sensitive health data within national borders. Before we built anything, we invested months planning exactly how we're going to ensure the data aggregation platform is made in a regulatory compliant way. And here's how we did the first one of data protection. Firstly, we had to map out the direct versus indirect identifiers. Here they're identified as key attributes, quasi-identifiers, and sensitive attributes. So things like names are pretty obvious, but even combinations of things which aren't directly identifiable to you, such as your date of birth, your gender, or your zip code, when used in combination, can effectively undo any anonymization that you have by removing your name. So when you combine that as well with very sensitive data, like the diseases, that also is a way of really identifying a patient. So you need to find a way of changing the data into such a way that you can no longer identify a person, even if you try to, but still keep essential information. So here's some of the techniques that we applied. We started with patient anonymization through the use of computer scripts that generalize record attributes until records are indistinguishable from each other. Then we added differential privacy, which is strategically injecting statistically relevant noise into the data so that you can't reverse engineer any particular person because it no longer maps perfectly to any individual person. We also created secure data enclaves and rule-based access so that not everyone can get access to the system and only essential people interact with the data. So for instance, even I, as a CEO, can't get access to the data or get information about where the data is being stored, how the anonymization is being done, or how it's being accessed. Only key people as part of our statistician team see that pieces of the data. So the result is that even if we had someone who was fully aware of how we built our system and decided to do a malicious attack, they couldn't identify the patients behind our product. And this is how we made it compliant with GDPR, South Africa's POPI, and the African Union's Convention on Cybersecurity and Personal Data Protection. The data refinery process itself has 6 steps. Starting off, it's how you get the data in. Let's call that the crude intake. There's many ways to do this, from HL7/FIRE feeds, CSV exports, API pulls, etc. At Kapsule, we take in data with all of those methods and more. So the second is data validation, doing a data schema check, deduplication of records, or any high-level cleaning. Thirdly is the pseudonymization using salted SHA-265 hashing. We also have anonymization after that, such as k-anonymity, differential privacy noise, and also L diversity. And we also have next data aggregation, which is an annexing, where we use OLAP cubes, think giant Excel pivot tables, but much, much more powerful. And we also utilize time series DB to maximize the compression of repetitive data. And then finally, there is distribution, how we share data with our customers. That can be done through RESTful APIs, dashboards, secure SFTP drops, however the customer likes to receive data. Countries like Nigeria, Kenya, and Rwanda have very explicit rules that prohibit the exporting of sensitive data outside of the country. This really matters when you're doing data analytics, especially Pan-African analytics, because you often need to use the large cloud providers like Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, or Amazon Web Services to access the computing remotely. The main problem with this is that the cloud computers aren't hosted locally across Africa, and that means that moving things to the cloud actually falls foul of the regulations in some instances. So the challenge then becomes, how do you get access to the scalable compute that's necessary to do the data refining while also staying on the right side of data sovereignty? In this environment, you have three options. One is to use on-premise data centers. That's the preferred option from a legal perspective. However, there's challenges when it comes to local infrastructure and reliability of the local servers. And the second is to use locally or local cloud providers, which are similar to the G clouds or AWSs of the world, but are based within country. Now, some of the challenges that they have is that they're often slower, more expensive, and with more limited tooling when compared to the big cloud providers. The third is hybrid cloud, which is our choice, and that's a way of using a mix of on-premise servers, local cloud providers, as well as the global cloud providers like AWS, G Cloud, and Azure. So we've managed to turn healthcare data into something de-identifiable, and we've also managed to make it usable for analytics. But who actually buys the data, and what are they paying for? We've responded to hundreds of data requests, and the type of data requests that we tend to get is very consistent. And the customers fall into one of two categories. One, they want to sell something, or two, they want to research something. And the 5 questions that they typically ask is the same in these 5 questions here. What is the size of the market in USD? What is the size of the market in terms of population? What is the average cost of care in dollars? What is the average cost of medicine in dollars? And what proportion of medicine is going through the public or private sector, or branded or generic medicines? Here's a more granular breakdown of the main themes that we see for data requests. You have 4 different organization types, which either want high-level market data or de-identified patient-level data. And the amount that they're willing to spend is also reflective of the amount of revenue that the company typically generates. So what tactics can you use to make the most of your healthcare data? I have 5 key takeaways. The first is to write a data minimization plan so that you only collect the key data that you need. 2 is use open source anonymization libraries, such as ARX or Google DP. 3 is to keep a re-identification risk register, so essentially tracking when you see the risk of being able to re-identify a patient go up. That will help with your compliance. 4 is choose a local cloud provider first, if you can, and then only use a global once you've managed to do the anonymization locally. And then the 5th is probably the most important for sustainability, is to segment your customers early, because this is very resource intensive and time consuming. So making sure you have the right buyer is very, very advisable. So when health data feels scary, companies tend to either hoard or delete data. But once you actually know what to do with that data, you can actually unlock its value. So for us, we found that the use case could vary from researchers to NGOs to governments to private sector and to health tech. And for us, we've realized that the payoff is a stronger research capacity, increased responsiveness, and of course, improved economic impact for their countries. So whether you're looking into infrastructure, anonymization, or pipelines, or even today's market size in dollars, we at Capsule are working to be the industry's leading refinery, but we know we can't do it alone, which is why we're sharing what we learned so that collectively we can all transform crude data that isn't very useful into extremely useful and valuable insights. I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, David and Miranda. Great presentations. We have several questions popping up in the chat. So I'm going to start with the first one for you, David. How are the risks of de-anonymization perceived in the African context, particularly when it comes to sharing genomic data for cloud processing?
Yeah, so the way it's perceived is very, very risk averse, and understandably so. And there's a term that we use internally at Capsule that genetic data is actually radioactive data, because if anything goes wrong, all of the regulatory force will come down on you heaviest. So this was, for instance, the type of data I was referring to is mostly around the things such as EHR data or ERP data or things of that nature. I would say even a higher level of scrutiny would be required for genomic data, and rightly so. So I would say everything and some would probably be my summary for the genomic data specifically.
Just building on that question that I'd like to tag on, do you do some audit tracking to see if there is a breach of sorts of things, to know what exactly happened, to kind of, for the lack of a better way, find the culprits of, improper?
So fortunately, we haven't had any data breaches so far. So what we do is we periodically try and re-engineer it ourselves. So we have our team to see, are there any ways or vulnerabilities that they can attack themselves, and see if there's any ways that they can use fragments of data to re-identify any patient. So we have a team that's sitting there just trying to undo all of the work that our great CTO and cybersecurity team have put in place. And we just have a team just trying to break it and find any vulnerabilities with it. Thankfully, we haven't had any issues as yet, but we're constantly on the alert for that.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to jump to Agnes, who has her hand up, and then we'll come back to the questions in the chat. So Agnes, go ahead. Feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Yes, Mr. David, thank you for the great talk, and happy to connect right after here. My question is around the segmentation of the customers or the users of these platforms. And we've seen the diversity of various African institutions. And of course, some of the solutions are really compute heavy. They need a lot of sustainability, the skill sets that really would support the use of some of these platforms, even after Capsule has handed them over. So how do you do this segmentation? And then the second is around some of the solutions you have, like on-premise data centers or cloud credits. What has been your experience in the African continent? Because some of these are really costly. And what would be the alternatives if we are to continue with the federation in the African ecosystem?
Yeah,
thank you.
So just to recount your question, I'll start off with your second one in terms of our experiences on the ground. So what we found is, as I kind of alluded, the best method was to use a combination of approaches. So in many instances, so just a bit of context, Capsule primarily focuses more towards the private sector. One of the reasons for that is because that's where we found that the data integrity is generally at the highest, and the amount of work that needs to do to get it up to the level where we can aggregate it is the least amount of work. So we tend to target private institutions, and even if they're not as advanced in their digital lifestyle, in their life cycle, or they're still using very rudimentary tools, what we found is that the private sector institutions still capture very essential information about who has a disease, what the primary complaint is when they're being led in to or seeking healthcare, what their doctor's diagnosis and prescription is, the purchasing as a result of that, and then finally the health outcome. Those are the 5 key elements that we need to see within a data set before we start working with them. Then once we identify them, if their data is on-prem, what we found is we can either do an approach where we have local hardware that can be installed, in some cases very cheaply, in others it could be a little bit more costly. But let's say even at the lowest scale, if you have a Raspberry Pi that is running those miniature computers that you're able to have the script that can do the de-identification and anonymization steps that you need, that is all that's sufficient to be able to then use that tool to then export it to the cloud, provided the facility is internet connected. You then have more compute-heavy institutions where you may need a server rack or something like that, where the investment would go up from a couple $100 in the case of the Raspberry Pi to a couple $1,000 to have the compute necessary. But what we found is that most facilities, especially in the African context, don't necessarily require that as much compute, because the number of patients that they're seeing isn't as high, and the amount of data that they're collecting isn't as high. And then once you have it de-identified locally and you have it to a sufficient level where you can't re-identify any patients, that's when it's no longer sensitive data and then could be used by the cloud providers, where you can do the more complex analytics, and that would be the Google Clouds, AWS, etc. Now, I know that all of those provide initial cloud credits for usage, so you can probably sign up for a research account or a small startup accounts they also make, where they can give you from $5,000 worth of credits right up to $150,000 of credits, all completely free to use a service. But again, one of the things that I pointed out, and this ties to your first question about the customer segmentation, is eventually someone is going to have to carry that cost. If they give you, because when they do give you those credits, it also has a time limit. So you would have $20,000 worth of credits that expire in 2 years, but then at the end of that, you would need something to finance it. So one of the reasons why we also primarily focus on the private sector is because we found customers who need the data so much, they get enough value for it, that they're willing to pay the necessary costs to keep its upkeep. And that's been our approach, and why we've primarily focused on the private sector. We've tried to do work with governments, NGOs, and public sector, but what we found was they could mobilize capital for a period of time, but not indefinitely. So what you would end up doing is having a very similar model to the credit system that works with the cloud providers, where for 12 to 24 months, you may have enough credit, but the moment either the credit runs out or the funding stops from that particular donor, then you have that sustainability problem. So to slightly switch gears to your original question on the customer segmentation, we defined it in 2 ways. One, and that's how we ended up with the 2 use cases as well. So we have those who are doing it for research and those who are doing it to sell products or sell something. And those who are looking to sell something, those are the ones who would have the most consistent and stable demand over time, because as a private sector company who's selling something to whichever type of institution, they have their minimum targets, monthly, quarterly, etc., that they want to hit, and they're willing to spend money to ensure that they hit that. And that's how we've been able to secure, frankly speaking, the capital necessary to run it to that customer type. And then the second component is the researchers. That's slightly more sporadic, and that's around research grants or research funding. They all have their own separate timelines and use cases. But essentially what we realized was the fundamental question that we found where we had consistent enough demand from the researchers was when they're trying to tie their research to the potential demand for medicines in a private sector or semi-private sector setting. So where can we identify the future customers of particular medicines or of particular consumables or of a particular campaign? And that's where we focus. So what we found was whenever someone has a vested interest a vested commercial interest, in understanding the market, that's where you can get the necessary capital and resources to invest. That's a very, very long answer to that question, but it was a very thorough question, so I needed to make sure I gave it the adequate attention.
Thank you, David. I mean, I do want to kind of have Miranda reflect on the policy question that Ashley raised, and I had the same one too. Is like you talked about more collaborations. You know, question is, are you tool focused on the institution? But I believe we need the tool to also access data policy. So Miranda, if you could reflect on that, that would be great. But and then we would like to come back, David, to one important question that's also there in terms of maybe we missed it on where you're harvesting the data from originally. But let's go to Miranda in the interest of time, and then we'll come back to you real quick.
Okay, thanks. So Abimiku, thank you for forgiving me for jumping over Nigeria, but the future is bright. So actually, the tool itself didn't require us to access the policies themselves. What we were asking is more questions around how the institutions work, what governance policies they have. So we just wanted to get an understanding of what their governance structures look like and how this relates to, especially around data management. So we didn't really need to access the policies themselves. But for the project itself, the nature of the collaboration is that there will need to be movement of data. So one of the things that we're looking at is having a joint data sharing agreement that will allow the movement of anonymized data. And this does take into consideration the different policies and laws in the different countries. Agnes, you can add if I've not if I've left anything out. Thanks.
Thank you, Miranda. David, real quickly, I mean, I think we have 2 minutes left. What is the source of the data? And I think there are several questions that tie into that. I'm curious, what kind of checks and balances and consent do you take from them?
Yeah, so the sources of our data is from the data controllers. So those who have custodial rights of the data. So that could be the hospital, it could be the insurance company, it could be the pharmacy, it could be a health tech or any institution that is managing the patient. So we don't deal directly with the patients themselves. And I guess this goes into our business model. Why they decide to share data with us is in twofold. One, we have the data anonymization happen at source. So we can't, by the time we get it, we can't identify the patients anyway, but then we do additional layers of things to make sure that even what leaves us and goes to our customers has gone through additional processes. So there's sort of 2 steps of layers between the data source being the patient and then our customers. The second is that we also have tied commercial incentives. So we have a profit share with all of our data sources. And before sharing their data anywhere, they first are notified what the customer type is and what the use case is prior to giving their consent for that data to be shared in that use case. So let's say, for instance, if we had a pharmaceutical customer and one hospital wasn't comfortable sharing their data and another was, the one who wasn't comfortable can opt out and or it's an opt-in method by default. So they just wouldn't opt in and their data would not be shared. And the one who decides to opt in, their data would be shared, still with the same level of anonymization throughout. So that's the way of the data controllers managing where their data goes. And then because we have transparent profit shares, they know exactly how much revenue is tied to that opportunity and the value of their data that is contributing to that overall opportunity. So in some cases, it may just be one data partner who is contributing their data alone, and then in which case it's a 50-50. Or in another one, it could be 10 different vendors, in which case they would get 5% each for those 10 vendors. So they have that transparency up front, and then they can weigh up the pros and cons and their own risk tolerance to see if that's a scenario which they're happy to work with. But that's kind of tied into our business model. And we built that just so that we can build a more inclusive commercial environment where You don't have the big tech of old where they have all the data monopolizing it and no one else sees the value. We've decided to deploy one where the actual generators of the data share in the commercial upside as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you both, Miranda and David, for great presentations, and everyone for also excellent questions. This is very productive, and it's exactly 10. Let's probably get back to the main session. It's perfect timing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
For having me.